Hi, this is my presentation for PIDP 3250, the Instructional Strategies Report. So I chose the student engagement technique number 9, which is called frames. In this technique, students are given a template of sentence stems with blank lines for them to fill in, creating a short essay or list of directions or just general set of notes. So here's kind of an example to get an idea. To draw a fashion flat, you use the blank tool to draw and the blank tool to move the lines and objects. The keyboard shortcuts for these tools are blank and blank. So the student would, with a pen in these typed out notes, they would write in the correct answer to the blank and then hang on to that set of notes with their newly filled in answers. So it is a good alternative to notes rather than basically giving the students a sheet of paper stating the facts that they're not guaranteed to read or hang on to. It actively forces the student to actually engage with the material. So I selected this student engagement technique because it is a tactic that one of my favorite high school teachers used. I kind of forgot that it existed, but when I was reading through the textbook, I was reminded of the way that he had us record our notes. And I think that it could be applied to a variety of topics. And anytime I want to give an informational handout, it would be a great way to ensure that it actually gets read. I know that when I was in his class, I was a lot more active with my notes because I kind of filled them in myself, but I also knew they were accurate because they were partially written by him. I also personally really like filling out forms because it gives a kind of a visual element. It makes it easier for me to recall terms, and I think that other students might feel the same, especially in a field like mine, which is fashion design, where you do tend to get a lot of very visual, creative learners. And then I just wanted to talk about alignment between motivation strategies and my personal teaching strategies. I kind of picked a few and then thought about how they applied to this technique. And I think that they kind of work together in a really great way that makes it clear that this definitely would work in motivating students and teaching students. So for example, a motivation strategy that I employ is to promote student autonomy as much as possible. This is a great example of that because it's actually something that they're taking to their desk and working on personally. But then it also provides opportunity for guided practice because it's not entirely autonomous. So they do have kind of like that nice mesh between doing it by themselves, but then also having a framework of what they need to do. I also think it's important to teach things that are worth learning, and then that in turn will promote active learning. Obviously, that's kind of more content specific to what you put in the frames, but I think in general, they'll feel like writing in these blanks is more worth their time than just reading a sheet of information. And then to craft engaging learning tasks. So this is a rather engaging technique where they do actually have to work on it themselves, and I think that that obviously captivates their attention. And then the last motivation strategy, to integrate goals, activities, and assessment kind of all in one, and then to use creative tools. So the integration works in that their goal is to kind of answer the questions, to fill in the key terms within the blanks. That is kind of an activity, and then it's also an assessment because it is filling in the answer to a question. I think that the importance of this technique is that it provides an increased comprehension of the topic. I like to think of it kind of like a practice quiz and a reference combined. And it helps the students identify the most important information and the key terms. What's great is that it's kind of like they highlighted the words because they are written in pen and everything else is typed. They do stand out on the page in a really great way. It's more effective than traditional notes and handouts because it is engaging. It gives students an idea of their knowledge of the topic and where to improve. That's kind of where the practice test part comes in. And it promotes questions which open a student-teacher dialogue, just like any assignment would, where they're trying to find the answer to something. That often gets them to ask other students or refer to the textbook or sometimes ask the teacher, which I think is great. And then kind of on that same note, some advantages to this strategy are that it is good for students who don't have very neat handwriting or they can't inscribe quickly. It makes it easier for them to read back on their notes because part of them are typed. And then in the same sort of way, it helps to assist English language learners because it gives them a very good structure and outline of the language, and so they can focus on the vocabulary building and concept understanding as opposed to writing and spelling and all the little details that are more difficult for them. It can also be prepared in advance by the instructor to go along with a lecture or slides, which I think is great because it kind of makes all of the material cohesive, where the lecture, the slides maybe follow the exact same form as the frame notes. It also allows students to test their understanding of the material, which I've said, and it is similar to a fill-in-the-blank section on an exam, which then prepares them because they're used to filling in blanks. So if you put it on a final, it's a technique that they're used to doing. A few disadvantages are that the blanks do need to be relatively specific in their answer. It's not kind of like a room for interpretation. It's more of a black and white system of like term definitions or more specific words. And it can be a very rigid way of thinking. It doesn't allow a lot of flexibility in response in the same way that like a reflective writing or a short answer kind of thing would. But I think that there's a time and place for that. And I think when it comes to notes, the flexibility is less important. And then in actually creating with the frames, it can be kind of difficult to try and find a balance between leaving enough information out of it and blank for the students to fill in, but also including enough that it is obvious how to fill it in. So it's just kind of like trying to find the balance yourself when making the frames. And it could be discouraging for students who are already confused because it does kind of have like that practice test format where they have to find the answer. Some other notes and learning tools aren't so specific on right and wrong, which I think doesn't always work really well for students that are maybe a little bit more confused or discouraged. And the most important, biggest disadvantage is that if the blanks are filled in incorrectly and then they study from them, that's bad. So obviously you don't want them to have an ineffective study tool. Which kind of brings me to the role of the student. It's important that they pay attention to the lecture and class demonstration and identify the key takeaways. They use the information provided around the blanks to eliminate possibilities and choose the best term, sort of thinking back on the lesson. So recalling information is really important in this technique. And create an accurate study tool. Like I said, they have to make sure that those answers are right, because if they fill in the blanks incorrectly, they're doing themselves a large disservice. And then they should definitely make sure that they review the filled-in frames or notes to recall for a final exam. Kind of like study back on them and don't just fill them in and then leave them. And then the role of the instructor is to make sure that all of the blanks are fillable based on precisely what they covered in the lesson. They have to make sure that they're giving all the information that the students need to find the answers. It's important that the information go in order. So in a test, sometimes you kind of have like this random scattering of information because it's more difficult for them to find the answers. You don't want to do that. You want to make it as chronological as possible. It should go in the same order as the lecture. It should have the same headings as the lecture, so it's really easy to follow. And then to help the students make sure that they fill the frames in accurately for later study purposes, and to clearly organize the lesson so that key ideas can be pulled from the general information. So that's kind of my presentation on this topic. Here are some references for you to take a review. I have quotes throughout. And I think that's it. Thank you so much.